Welcome to our World Heritage 2021 debate. 2021 debate is a year of events focused on protection, conservation, and management of World Heritage. We want to uncover untold stories to broaden our views on heritage practices and future perspectives. Knowledge gathered this year will be published in 2022 on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the Convention. The Our World Heritage Initiative is created by individuals working on 100% voluntary capacity. We would like to point out that Our World Heritage provides an open dialogue platform that is based on voluntary work of session organizers and speakers. Our World Heritage welcomes diverse viewpoints in the spirit of collegial debate where mutual respect is afforded to all. Please note that the expressed views do not necessarily reflect the official position of Our World Heritage. We thank today's speakers for telling their stories, and we thank you, the listeners, for your kind interest and questions. If you want to remain up to date on our activities, you can follow our social media. We maintain channels in multiple languages to break through the language barriers and connect to local communities. You will find all links on our website, ourworldheritage.org. Thank you for being with us today, and we wish you a very fruitful event. Welcome to our World Heritage 2021 debate. 2021 debate is a year of events focused on protection, conservation, and management of World Heritage. We want to uncover untold stories to broaden our views on heritage practices and future perspectives. Knowledge gathered this year will be published in 2022 on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the Convention. The Our World Heritage Initiative is created by individuals working on 100% voluntary capacity. We would like to point out that Our World Heritage provides an open dialogue platform that is based on voluntary work of session organizers and speakers. Our World Heritage welcomes diverse viewpoints in the spirit of collegial debate where mutual respect is afforded to all. Please note that the expressed views do not necessarily reflect the official position of Our World Heritage. We thank today's speakers for telling their stories, and we thank you, the listeners, for your kind interest and questions. If you want to remain up to date on our activities, you can follow our social media. We maintain channels in multiple languages to break through the language.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you in this room and also in the YouTube. It is with great pleasure and honor that in behalf of the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, I welcome everyone to the new Heritage Approaches webinar as part of the 2021 debate promoted by the international initiative, Our World Heritage. This is a collaborative work which brought together universities, public and private institutions, nonprofit organizations, individuals interested in debating the relevant themes associated with the World Heritage Convention to be held in 2022 by UNESCO. In this context, I would like to introduce the main team and thank them very much for all the personal possible this Shaping the Metropolis and Global Report and Survey. And we have Pedro Ortiz and also Francisco Bandarin talking to us. Pedro Ortiz is from International Metropolitan Institute, Principal and Multilateral and Government Consultant. Mayor, Madrid CBD District from 93 to 95, Director Strategic Plan from 88 to 94, and Metropolitan Plan from 96 to 2016. Francisco Bandarin is an architect and urban planner specialized in urban conservation. From 2000 to 2010, as director, he was director of the UNESCO World Heritage Center, and from 2010 to 2018, served as Assistant Director General of UNESCO for Culture. The second part, we're going to have the survey questions, 4 case studies and comments from Korea, Italy, Russian Federation, South Africa. I'm going to have from Seoul, Jae Hyun Choi, from Milan, Antonella Contin, from Moscow, Ksenia Mezzanina, and Johannesburg, Jessie Karub Sebina. I hope I pronounce the names correctly, and I will ask them when they start talking, please to introduce themselves when they start their talk, their lecture. Then you're going to have comments from questions and answers, dialogue between Mike Turner and Eric Hubretz will make this dialogue. Mike Turner, he's an architect, UNESCO chair holder in urban design and conservation studies at Bezalel Academy of Arts and Design in Jerusalem, and advisor to the World Heritage Center. Eric Hubretz, sorry if the name's okay, is an architect and urban regional planner, manager of international affairs of the Institute in Paris region, France. And in the final part of the session, you're going to have the way forward with Rafael Forero. He's from Colombia, but he's coming from UN Habitat and Metro Hubs. He is works with policy, governance, and metropolitan expert in UN Habitat, United Nations Human Settlements Program. Then he will make the wrap up of the session as a final conclusion. And I'll pass the floor to our first part of the session, setting the scene. I'll pass the floor to Pedro Ortiz and then to Francisco Bandarin. Please, it's up to you.
Oh, mute.
I think have to open your microphone.
Unmute. Sorry.
Okay.
Very sorry for that mistake. Well,
that's nice. You can start, please.
Thank you, Vera, for that introduction. I am going to address mainly the metropolitan structure and the metropolitan side of this issue of metropolitan heritage, because in my experience, I have been dealing with the whole aspects of a metropolis. And the heritage in a metropolis is in 2 aspects of it, which is one is the social facilities, the tangible heritage is part of the social assets, the social facilities of the metropolis, among which there are many, and culture and heritage is one of them. And as well in the social side of the structure of the metropolis, the collective subconsciousness of that intangible heritage, and which is part of the collective intelligence of a metropolis. So there are many aspects to the metropolis, and heritage and tangible and intangible are more located in that area. This slide is the same as the previous one, but I have enlarged those 2 components, the social and the physical component of the metropolis. For any of you that will want the presentation, I will be happy to send it. At the end, I will put my email so I can send it, and you will be able to see how that components are structured within and where is the location of heritage. So my job, as I was in charge of Madrid Metropolis, and then at the World Bank, I've been dealing with in 68 countries with metropolises and governments of those countries. My job is more integrative of those metropolises, and that's going to be the focus of my presentation. I've been looking at the Metropolitan Heritage category criteria, and I have found that there are 10 categories, and 6 of them are man-made heritage, and 4 of them are non-man-made heritage. That means natural heritage with no human intervention. No? But then within the man-made heritage, there are some gardens, no? Which are around the world. These are the locations of the UNESCO category, no, that relates to garden, which is the anthropocized aspect of man changing nature and creating an artificial, a man-made nature, which is very important for the metropolis, and we will see that. No? I'm going to look at the metropolitan urban difference. Metropolises are a DNA completely different from urban, and one of our big mistakes is that we apply to metropolises what we know about urban, and urbanism is a science science of practice that has been developing for 170 to 200 years, and we know a lot about urbanism and how to deal with cities. But metropolis is a phenomena that has appeared in the last 70 years since the Second World War, that we have gone from 3 metropolises in the history of the world to now 500, and we will discuss that. And we really have to build up that knowledge, which is completely different from urban. And that is going to be my point of discussion, because obviously if we have to address the metropolitan heritage, we will have to address it in a very different form that we address the urban heritage. And that is necessary, and that has not yet been really approached. And that's what is a new way of addressing these issues of that kind of size. On the metropolitan urban difference, I'm going to talk about the structure, the population, the size, which is related to time, and the scales. My first slide is, what is a city? A city has a center, historical center, grows around that center. Mostly they grow in a radial and orbital way, and when the city grows, it adds up an onion ring around the city, and there is a continuum of built zones, so it's a conurbation. And that is the basic structure of cities. Obviously, we have differences and we have exceptions and so on, but that is the basic structure of a city. A metropolis is not at all like that. A metropolis is a set, and we will see that in the definition, is a set of urban units that share a daily significant commuting. No? And those urban units are separated, and they should never merge. That's one of the problems, the illnesses of metropolis, that the managers, the politicians and civil servants of metropolis do not realize, that those urban units should never merge, because the environment, the green and blue infrastructure, the rivers and the green should go in those interstices and should flood the metropolis and allow this quality environment to be close to the residents and to the different functions of the metropolis, instead of pushing it behind the borders, behind the conurbation, which obviously is unsustainable in the long and even in the short term, because we have seen how those metropolis that grow like conurbations, like oil states, like Bogota, for instance, are unsustainable and are so difficult to serve in all the aspects of transport, equitable housing, and so on. So you see from the start, the structure of the metropolis and the structure of the city is completely different. Then another issue is the scales. You know, people that come from the architectural or engineer background, we know very well that when we design any kind of spatial item, we deal with different scales, no? And so architecture is in the scale of 150, urban design is the scale of 1/500, urban planning is in the scale of 1/5000, and metropolitan planning is 10 times larger, is in the scale of 150,000. That doesn't mean that it's a precise scale. We were working with Argentina, with Cordoba in Argentina, not long ago, and obviously the scale in Cordoba, the Pampa, and the large expansions of a continent like Argentina makes that the metropolitan scale there is 1 to 150,000, no? But it's still half the way of many countries, which is national development scale, which is 1/500, and so on, until the world structure, which is 150 million. So scale is very different, 10 times larger than cities, and then we have to have a different type of disciplines that deal with that scale, a different type of approaches, and a different type of governance. I'm not going to talk about governance, but that's as well an issue that will differentiate enormously what a metropolis and a city is. And this difference of scale work in all the sectors that we are going to see in the metropolis. One of them, obviously, is environment, and we have different approaches, different scales of approach to environment in a metropolis. We have the national parks, regional parks, metropolitan parks, and so on. And each of those environmental quality and green infrastructures have to have a different type of approach. And that's where the UNESCO category of man-made nature, gardens and parks and so on, comes into place. No? None of our metropolitan environments is natural, completely natural. Is all being transformed by purpose or by use by man, and so we have to adapt and incorporate that environment to our heritage, not only the inherited natural heritage, but the heritage of what we are going to do with it for the future generations. And the same thing, as I mentioned, for environment is transport. Every mode of transport has a level of distance, efficiency, and we need planes, and we need cycles, bicycles, and they are compatible, and we have to position those modes in the different stages of those kind of scales, no? And obviously, when we deal with international scale, the global scale, we are dealing with planes, and when we are dealing with the local scale, the neighborhood one, we are dealing with bicycles. But the metropolitan one is in the middle, and is this kind of regional based on commuter trains and so on, because even BRTs are urban, and even metro is urban, because metro is underground because the city is on top, no? But commuting is not. Commuting is linking those different urban units that compose the metropolis, and that's the basic metropolitan mode of transport that has to be articulated and related to the others to make a consistent pattern from the international to the very local, and each mode is not better, but is complementary to the others. To bring that idea of the need to integrate that kind of approach to the metropolis, which is a new dimension, I want to bring Cedric Price's joke about the evolution of the cities, no? That in medieval times, a city was like a boiled egg with a yolk and the crust that were the walls, the medieval walls of defense in the city. Then in the 18th, 19th century, it became a fried egg with all the enlargements around the center, the yellow of the egg. And now in these modern times, we are in a kind of a pattern of scrambled eggs. We don't know anymore where things are, and it's just a mass of informal development, which is growing and growing and growing. And this image, obviously, is the final exaggeration of that kind of scrambled eggs that we are doing with our cities and our metropolises. And that's a Guinness record of a lot of soi-disant cooks producing a mass of scrambled eggs. And that is the actual situation we are confronting with the metropolis. And obviously, that is what we have to manage. And we cannot allow ourselves to be the heritage of our generation for the future generations. So as I mentioned before, a metropolis is a set of urban units that share a significant daily commuting, but it is not a population size. Metropolis cannot be defined by population size. Metropolis cannot be defined as well by distance and by size, because they are independent from those. No? But if we need to deal with the population, I would suggest that the threshold to be a metropolitan structure is 3 million inhabitants, because that's the threshold where the mode of transport for metropolis, the commuter train, starts to be indispensable, just starts to be necessary. And under 3 million people, you are not in need that kind of metropolitan need of transport, and you can just work with BRTs and metros, no? But as well, not only the 3 million threshold, but as well the million threshold, if you are experiencing a 5% annual growth, because if you are experiencing a 5% annual growth, in 20 years, you will be 3 million. So in that kind of case, you should already forecast that you are going to be a metropolis, and you should plan and you should produce the structure of the metropolis in the future. 20 years is nothing, it's tomorrow morning. So you really have to already think that you are a metropolitan structure and start to work on that when you are a million, if you are growing fast at 5% annual growth, that many cities and metropolises around the world are doing that. No? In terms of size, we must realize that the unit of distance in a metropolis is not the kilometer. The unit of distance in a metropolis is the minute, no? And for instance, in medieval times in Madrid, people took 25 minutes to reach their agricultural field by walking or by on top of their donkey, no? Because the structure of the agricultural network of cities, villages, is half a league, 1 league away, so your field will be half a league. So you took 25 minutes to reach your agricultural field. And today in Madrid, you still take 25 minutes to go to your work, where the average work is 22 kilometers away, and you take 25 minutes. So you see the size of your human experience of your urban phenomena has not changed in 7 centuries. And the unit of distance in a metropolis is not the kilometer, it's the minute. And well, unfortunately, many metropolises are not able to manage their structures adequately. And the metropolis which are in developed countries, developed metropolises, you took from 30 to 40 minutes to reach your work, no? But in metropolis like New Delhi, Mumbai, 2 hours and a half, or in Bogota, the same type of time, or in Guatemala, 1 hour and a half, 2 hours. So the point is that if you take more than 1 hour to get to your work, you should change your mayor, because that means that the administration and the politicians on top of that administration are not being able to manage the metropolis right, and are not able to produce the gray infrastructure necessary for the management of the metropolis. And then there is another issue that is
careful with the time, because of have a full strips of the session. Please just take care.
All right, so I'm going to finish as quick as possible. And the third thing is the wealth that generally is not discussed. My point is that metropolises that are to be metropolises are beyond 1 million inhabitants. When you're talking about 300,000 people, that's a block in New Delhi, Luton's block in New Delhi. And we should really, and you're talking about a 15-minute metropolis, which is not really a metropolis. Now we have 500 metropolis, which is 75% of the GDP of the world and 25% of the population, which shows that metropolis are much more productive than the rest of the country. And the structure of the metropolis, the sectors are the physical sectors. We are only in the physical area, is the environment, the natural environment, the transport, housing, productive activities, and social facilities. And each of them have a heritage. For instance, the streetcars in Lisbon are the transport heritage of Lisbon. The pan de azúcar, the sugar loaf in Rio is the environmental heritage of Rio. The pattern of housing in Paris is as well a heritage of Paris. The Battersea Park Station, power station, is the industrial, the productive activities heritage of London, or the Lincoln Center is the social facilities heritage of New York. So every one of those physical elements have a heritage component, and we have to build that heritage component on all our production of metropolises. From the metropolitan perspective, my own concerns about heritage are, is the tower, the Eiffel Tower, a metropolitan heritage or just an international icon of the city? No, and so we have to separate what is really, what is the identity of the city in itself, of its citizens, that is the heritage, and what is just an icon for branding the city around. No, but in that case, if the Eiffel Tower is more the icon of Paris, is then the Versailles, because it's not in the center of Paris, is Versailles more of a metropolitan heritage? Then we have to separate as well what is the heritage of the metropolis, which is all the elements that produce the culture. The Medici, the Maria de Medici sculpture in the Luxembourg Gardens in Paris is obviously heritage of the metropolis, but is not the symbol that produces that image. And those patterns, fabric of the housing patterns, that makes that you recognize the metropolis, the city, immediately. You see what Paris is, like this 1860s type of building from Haussmann, Napoleon III. You see immediately that Madrid is the pattern of housing is part of that heritage. It's not only the single monuments, the strong single monuments, but not only the center. The center is not the metropolis. The center is just the king in the chess game. The metropolis is all the pieces around that are as important as the king, the queen, the bishops, the knights, the towers, and so on, the rooks, and so on. And so you see this pattern of architecture in the periphery of those metropolis, and I put some images of that, are as well, or I will say even more, the heritage of the metropolis. And now with social housing in the 20th century, we are as well producing a heritage. We might not be very proud of it, but that will be the heritage that we will leave for future generations. And each of those metropolises, the four I've taken as an example, obviously have a different housing, a social housing pattern, and we must be aware that that is the heritage we are going to leave. And then, unfortunately, many of those metropolises have the problems of the periphery. I don't like to call it periphery because periphery means an orbital, a radial system, and the metropolis is not a radial or orbital system, but people generally think about the periphery. We have to address that future heritage and to see if what we want is metropolitan inclusiveness, which is cultural acceptance, or metropolitan inculturization, which is cultural assimilation, or metropolitan interculturality, which is cultural summation, or transculturality, which is the synthesis of cultures. And this is something that we have to address in the next years to know what we do want. And each metropolis is having a different approach to that, no? And that is worth discussing because that's going to be the heritage of the metropolis. And from the icon of the Eiffel Tower, is that really the heritage of the metropolis for all these peripheral areas of Paris, or is really where they meet because it's the hub of transport where 6 lines join underground and produce much more accessibility than any other place in Paris? Is that really the heritage, the Les Halles, the places we're building now that have to symbolize the metropolis? We have all these sectors, and each of those sectors participate in the production of the metropolitan heritage. And Rio, for instance, if Rio doesn't integrate the different places of the large metropolitan set or the different sectors within that large, with the role of each of them has to play within the structure of the metropolis, then Rio will not be able to produce a heritage of sectors and places integrated for the future, and will be in disjointed incrementalism as we have been inherited from the past. We must realize that this heritage already existed in the 19th century at an urban scale, St. Pancras Station or New York Central Park, but the metropolitan scale is different, and then it has to have a continuity. It's not an enclosed garden like like Central Park is. It has to grow among all the cities and villages in the metropolis, like Madrid, Rio is, or it has to have to go beyond the borders of the metropolis and link the territorial structures and become symbols of that territorial structuring, which is the Gare de Lille. We have as well the intangible metropolis, and that is very difficult to grasp. In Madrid, people all feel that they are members of the Real Madrid. So is that the heritage of the metropolis, the football club? No, even if they have the local football clubs. Or some cities like Barcelona feel that the national flag of Catalonia is the symbol of Barcelona, no? And sometimes it's the languages. You know that we started in the 20th century with 7,000 languages around the world, and we only have 6,000 languages. We're losing one language every month, and we have been losing that for a century. And so some metropolises feel that the language is their own, that they're owner of the languages, or the ethnicity that represents the metropolis. And those are intangible values. And when a metropolis is 60%, like Manila, Egypt, or Buenos Aires, 60% of the GDP of the country, obviously the metropolis feels that the values of the country are their own values, and they empower themselves with those values. And that is the problem of the metropolis. Well, then the final slide is the intangible culture that belongs to metropolis, and that intangible culture, there is always a conflict between the popular culture in Paris, La Java, and the intellectual culture of l'Académie Française, which is the metropolis of Paris, l'Académie Française or the Java, no? And that comes back to the genome of the metropolis, the dichotomy between the economic and social, the economic efficiency and the social justice that is resolved ideologically. People push more for the economic, other people push more for the social, and then the academic versus popular. So my final message, again, is like I mentioned before, we cannot produce metropolis which are scrambled eggs, Guinness records. We have to structure that into systems that will work in these sectors and that will be able to produce the heritage in each of those sectors, the heritage we will leave for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Pedro. Sorry for time control because you have speakers and also a next session that will be just the same platform, so we cannot just go on time. But sorry for that, and I just try to control the time for you. And now I just we welcome Francesco to.
Thank you, Vera, and thank you, Pedro. As always, you are the master in presenting, the nature of the metropolis. I really thank you very much for your definition. It's very useful for us. Now, I promise to be very short because I think it will be more important for us to listen to the case studies and see the issue from bottom up in a way. But I've been asked to somehow summarize the key points of this research project that we have launched on heritage and the metropolis, and which is reflected on today's workshop. But it's something that goes in parallel and has perhaps a couple of years life projected already. Because I think we are raising some questions that prove to be quite interesting, at least for the time being. We think that the interest is there, and some of them are not easy to answer. I think Pedro showed that there is many questions don't have an answer yet, so it's something we have to explore. And also, I think in some senses, it may even reach a level in which we have to question our own paradigms of those who manage heritage and heritage conservation, which is somehow the most difficult thing. To change a paradigm of a group of conservators is very complicated. Let me say also that I totally agree. I think as a starting point is what we sometimes use the city model for that. It's like Metropolis is a big city. It's not just a big city, or it is not a big city at all. It's something else. This is the reason, I think, why so far the conservation profession has never grasped this issue. if you think about, there is a complete void in this matter, in this issue. 15 years ago, in fact, ICOMOS organized a conference on heritage in the metropolis, but the results were not so relevant because they had not made this jump. You know, ICOMOS was seeing the metropolis as a big city. And if you take a metropolis as a big city, essentially you apply the same parameters, the same idea, the same conceptual frameworks that you use for a city to just a city that is a little bigger, right? And so you can't reach any results. Also, let's remember that 15 years ago, certain ideas that are now more on the ground, like considering certain types of heritage, cultural landscapes, infrastructure, things that have a more this kind of metropolitan scale, were not that established. And also perhaps 15, 20 years ago, the issue of intangible also was not as established. Just remember that the Intangible Heritage Convention was only adopted 18 years ago, so it's not very much. Now, our point of departure for this research, and perhaps I just make a very, very short presentation so that can be reflected in some of the discussion later on, is exactly the following. First, we would like to understand what is the role that heritage plays in contemporary metropolises. Well, there are many metropolises, you said 500 already, but maybe, but anyway, there are many metropolises that have heritage, and heritage plays a role. It's a social, economic, sometimes even more, so even political role that we want to understand how this works. This is why we have selected a small sample of 12 big metropolis to try to understand this issue. First of all, how heritage is perceived, protected, dealt with, and which role it plays, in fact, in the metropolis in every sense. This will be like more, let's call it a photography of the situation, but you know, with a different definition of metropolis. So we are going to look at something, you know, with a different lens at the same object. But the second thing, we would like to focus on a dimension which is very evident in what Pedro was saying. Metropolis are fast changing social and economic contexts. They're not just stable. Year that you have a revolution in terms of everything, in terms of social constructs, social behavior, and heritage. Heritage is a social construct. It's not something that comes from, you know, an institution outside. It's produced by the society. It's always been like this. You know, if you take the long history of heritage from the 19th century to today, a couple of hundred years, we've seen an enormous and sometimes even dramatic change on the concept of heritage. Even the concept of urban heritage is relatively new, maybe 60, 70 years at the most. Before it didn't exist, before cities were not heritage, were not considered heritage. And in many countries, it's still like this. You know, I remember a discussion we had many times with the Indian government. You know, they couldn't believe that we thought that cities were heritage, and it was only 2 years ago, or even less, a year ago, 2 years ago, when the first Indian city was described in the World Heritage List, Ahmedabad, by the way. So you know, it's something new. So there are changes, and we would like to try to intercept these changes, to understand how this changing affect the nature of heritage as a concept, its role, the role it plays, also its nature, its very nature. What is heritage for a new population that comes to the city, you know, from either abroad or other parts of the country, with different languages, different traditions, different approaches, and different model lifestyle? Can we say that the city, because it's you know, it's recent, has no heritage? I think it would be very inappropriate to say that a city doesn't have heritage just because the population is recently migrated there. This is a discussion I had with my friends in Shenzhen, which, as you know, is a city only 40 years. And when people ask you, where is your heritage? Well, you know, the city is only 40 years. It doesn't matter. I mean, obviously you have heritage. If you have 16 million people, you have something that we call heritage, which is a projection of and a social construct of those who have migrated there. Maybe it's very different from what we think is heritage. And they say, well, we have to change our concept. We have to change our paradigm. So we would like to explore this changing paradigm that I think is very important, because unless we try to understand this kind of evolutionary process, we risk missing completely the idea of what a relationship between heritage and the metropolis. I think, at the end, we will have to revise some of the heritage paradigms that we have today. Sometimes I feel, maybe I'm exaggerating a bit, but I feel that we are still operating a 19th century concept of heritage, something that is essentially has been established by a group of experts, backed or by governmental institutions and so on, and that becomes get used to call heritage. But that is not the way in which the future is waiting for us. The signs are there in terms of different approaches to heritage, different approaches to places, different ways in which people find their own identity and represent their own identity, ways in which people satisfy aesthetic needs and so on. So we have to change, and perhaps the changing of the parameters of our heritage concepts will be the most interesting challenge of this research project. So I think I really packaged everything in a few minutes there. I apologize, but essentially I would like to leave this message to all of you. This is a research that is really open and wants to explore the future.
Thank you so much, Francesco. I know that you have plenty of subjects. I study with the metropolitan region of Rio de Janeiro. It's my field of research, so I'm just very much interested in what Pedro has showed, and also I agree with him, and I think it's a very good and a very important subject. Then I will go straight to the second part of the session, the survey questions, also the 3 case studies. Seoul will be presented by Jae Eun Choi, and then Milan with Antonella Contin, then Moscow with Ksenia Mezzanina, and Johannesburg with Jessie Karuri Sebina. Please, after that, then you're gonna have a brief moment for questions, debates, and questions that you just are pointing out in the Zoom and also in the YouTube. Thank you so much, Jay, thank you.
Hello, can you see my share the screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hello, everybody. My name is Jae-Hoon Choi. I'm a professor of Geography Department and the World Heritage Studies Department at Konkuk University, which is located in Seoul, Korea. It is my honor today to give my brief presentation about the Seoul case studies. The main survey questions that I like to focus on would be a short historical background of cultural heritage in Seoul, as well as main cultural policy framework to deal with future heritage and the intangible heritage part. So first of all, concerning the historical background, Seoul has over 2,000 years long history, starting around 18 BC as a capital city of Baekje Kingdom, later whose capital moved to Gongju, the southern part of South Korea, in 475 AD. Later, from 14th century to 1394, Seoul became a capital city of Joseon Dynasty, which has lasted from 14th century until early 20th centuries. Now, Seoul is a capital city of Republic of Korea with over 10 million population in the area of 605 square kilometers. It is one of the most densely populated metropolis around the world, with over 17,000 population per square mile, which means the population density. Seoul is the world city, actually, so that most of the historical remains and heritage are located in the northern side of Hanyang River, inside and around the Hanyang Dosung, that is the Seoul city wall. By 2020, there are 1,042 national designated heritage, including national treasure, historical site, scenic site, natural monument, intangible one, and folklore. Also, Seoul itself has 751 locally designated and registered heritage, in the category of tangible, monument, folklore, intangible, and registered one. There are 14 UNESCO heritage, including 3 World Heritage sites, 1 Intangible Cultural Heritage, and 10 Memory of the World. The right side map shows the distribution of historical properties in the 18th century. You can see the black lines surrounding the old city sector, which is the Hanyang Dosung, the Seoul City Wall. And the blue line means that the waterway. So you can easily see what it looks like. Secondly, I'd like to mention the cultural framework of Seoul Metropolitan Government. They nowadays take strategies to make the heritage sector more diverse and accessible to the publics, as well as formulate the cultural identity. 3 main strategies are taken, which is preservation of historic property, public engagement, and promoting intangible heritage. The strategy to preserve historic properties takes a broad view of heritage, ranged from historic environment and museums toward the traditional area and festivals. Main policy targets are the Seoul City Wall and the Historic Center, also the future heritage, and lastly, the cultural landmarks concept. The Seoul City Wall, so-called Hanyang Dosung, is so much important than any others. So Seoul Metropolitan Government is proceeding to nominate it as a World Heritage Site. It was the boundary of old Seoul, and the important heritage properties in the historic center surrounded by Seoul City Wall are including royal palaces, royal shrine, waterfront spaces, and so on, from ancient times to the modern architectural heritage from the 19th century. In order to restore the historic urban landscape, the city government is proceeding the comprehensive urban plans for sustainable preservation and management around the city wall itself, as well as nearby neighboring areas. This slide shows us the boundary of Seoul City Wall and its associated landscape. Let me move on to the next one, which is about the future heritage. The future heritage concept is the selected historical site regarding notable figures in history or notable stories and memories from citizens. The future heritage aims to preserve tangible or intangible properties for future generations, although they are not designated as a national or local heritage. The heritage selection process for the future heritage takes 2 different ways. The first one is submitting recommendations by local residents and heritage experts, while the other one is through collaborative process considering resident opinions, community groups, district representative, reviewed by the management committee. Until now, future heritage numbers 470 in the categories of political, industrial, city life, urban management, and culture and art. The city government provides financial support for repairs enough to preserve its own value, while for enhancing the value using new media like SNS, as well as for utilizing cultural public space. We can see such examples like the Myeongdong Theater, archives of a democratic movement, Hangmin Coffee Shop, which is very old coffee shop nearby the Seoul National University former site, and others. The last target is the cultural landmarks, which are representative cultural and historical assets able to enrich citizens' everyday life. According to the survey, most recognized landmarks are royal palaces. You can see the numbers of percentage here. Gwanghwamun Gate, Seoul Tower, Han River, and Namdaemun Market, then Cheonggyecheon Waterfront, and so on. So cultural landmarks aims to turn cultural heritage into tourism resources, as well as utilizing it as public spaces for cultural events. The strategy for the public engagement emphasized the cultural experience for local communities by establishing cultural education facilities like the Seoul Museum of Craft Art, which is opened in May this year, and by revitalizing projects of traditional music and performances like street performing. Moreover, by promoting public art projects like converting old industrial sites into urban heritage. The last strategy is promoting intangible heritage using living heritage as a cultural asset to improve its continuity. For this purpose, there are several policy measures to be done, including designation of intangible cultural heritage list, provision of financial support, providing support for disappearing traditional culture to individuals or organizations, as well as enhancing learning programs for general publics. All right, this is all for my presentation about the Seoul case. I like to keep my time. Thanks, Bella. Thanks for everybody for listening.
Thank you very much, Choi. Very important case studies, and Hannah have the second one. In the order would be Antonella with the case study of Milan. Can you please?
Yes, I hope that you can see my screen. Yes.
Part of it, I mean.
I try to enlarge. Anyway, I didn't prepare a presentation because Mike Turner asked me only an image. So I would like to show this image that is the way in which we try to represent the key study of the Metropolitan.
It's okay now, Antonella. Go ahead. It's fine now.
So, I said that I didn't prepare a presentation, but only an image, as Mike Turner asked me. This is a sort of manifesto, try to represent what does it mean, metropolitan heritage in the metropolitan area of Milan. But only in a glance, I prefer to start with the legenda of this manifesto. First of all, I would like to say that we try to answer to three of your questions, the question of your survey. First of all, if heritage policies be better associated to long-term spatial and economical planning. The second question is about which kind of values can be considered the future heritage that the metropolis could give us to the metropolitan citizenship. And I would like also to add a question related to is it possible to think that the heritage could prevent gentrification? That is one of the main risks of the fast growing of our metropolis. So that is the legend of my manifesto. I would like to add only one statement. 2 centuries ago, Carlo Cattaneo, that was a very famous scholar, Italian scholar, said that our region was a regional anonymous garden. So it's a region, it's a geographical region, and our region is defined by river, mountain and river. You see in the legenda, these are the Ticino, the Adda, and the Lambro. We are in the Po Valley. But right now in Italy, you see the river are not on the legenda of the blue infrastructure, but on under green infrastructure, because we convert river in park to protect them. That is fundamental. So to define a metropolitan region, we need geography. And we are in between a series of big rivers that are connecting among each other by old and new canals. And here you find the list of our canal. Since the Roman Empire and the Medieval, and when we had in the 18th century, the Industrial Revolution, we built canal to connect the river, and the canal produce a pact between the city and the territory, between the city and the water. And it was not related to a general ecological aim, but it was for production. So we can say that the richness of our metropolitan region since the past was this pact between city and water for industry, because also our agriculture was a very strong production mechanism. So that is the reason why we insert another fundamental element of the metropolitan heritage in Milan, that is the Parco Sud. The Parco Sud is a green belt that surrounded the city of Milan, and right now produce our particular specific landscape, that is this one, the Marcite landscape. It's very important for the metropolitan area, not only because it gives us the identitary anthropological image of our territory, but because determine this water system rich capability to produce agriculture with the Marcite, because the water, it's always at 0 degree, so we can have 2 harvests every year, but because right now is fundamental also for biodiversity. So the Parco Sud, that is our green heritage, and I would like to say not heritage, is the legacy of our heritage, is fundamental to produce, to feed our city, but also to produce leisure. And that is the reason why Carlo Cattaneo defined our territory regional anonymous garden. It's a garden, so it's not only a way, a place for the production, but it's also the place for beauty and leisure. And it is anonymous. So the capability to produce our territory was a social work. And that is the reason why Parco Sud, but also the river parks are so fundamental for the metropolitan region. Because when some political party during the year try to occupy this, the Parco Sud, but also the park, the river park, the metropolitan population started to become activist, because we try to protect our legacy, our green legacy, our green armature. And it was not only the population of Milan, but it was a population of all the other small and big towns that produce with their work, their territory. I would like to remind that Kevin Lynch used to say that our territory in Italy was a total built landscape. So it's a production of a social work. And for sure, we have the great infrastructure, a very complex and let's say a system of great infrastructures that work at all the scale. And finally, I would like to introduce the built construction metropolitan heritage. And I introduce 3 main elements. I don't know if it's possible to see, because I have to use yes, I don't find the way to transform it in a main, a bigger dimension. This one is very famous in Milan, because it's the old Ospedale di Filarete. It was the old hospital of Milan, and right now is our university. The second one is a very famous street in Milan, is Corso Garibaldi. Corso Garibaldi was another moment of the life of Milan and its metropolitan city, because in the 60s, a general plan would like to transform that ancient city, ancient street, in a huge in a huge arteria. And it was right in that time, because Corso Garibaldi was able to connect rapidly the center of the city with the territory. But again, the population of the city of Milan react and block this transformation. And right now, Corso Garibaldi is a place of the movida, is a place where every person from the neighborhood, from the province and from the small and the middle time of the metropolitan region of Milan come to Milan to stay in these, to visit these roads that is full of bar and shops, etc. And the third element is the new transformation, the new landmark of the metropolitan city, that is the Garibaldi, Stazione Garibaldi project, a mega project with tower, offices, a plaza that unfortunately is a private plaza for public use. So I would like to say that when we speak about heritage, metropolitan heritage, is not fundamental to consider regarding the built construction, that we have to build something that is permanent, something that we consider fundamental in our city, but we have to build something that is durable. Durable means that has the Ospedale del Filarete or has the Corso Garibaldi, so the main arteria, are able to produce new relationship and the capability to attract citizens, different identity for the entire metropolis. So I can return back to the manifesto, and you see that here we can find all our elements in a glance: the mountain, the river, a portion of the Parco Sud that is the way it's fundamental to feed our city, and the new, for sure, the main cities that in a network exchange everyday people, economy, goods, etc., and some part of our built construction that is able to be new regional and metropolitan landmark for our different identity. I would like to finish my presentation with another statement. Again, Kevin Lynch used to say that, not Kevin Lynch, sorry, but Pietro Verri, that was another very famous scholar, Italian scholar 2 centuries ago, said, the city is for the territories, such as the piazza is for the city. And that is my question to our guest, to our previous speaker. What about Metropoli? If we could make the same relation, the city is for the territory, such as the piazza is for the city. What about Metropoli for city? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Antonella. And if you now can just open your camera, because we can see your face. We are concerned about the connection, but it will worked okay. Plus, you can leave the camera on so that people can just know your face. Thank you so much. And also for the good question that you posed to the panelists. So they have to answer that after the 4 case studies. We're going to open for questions and answers. Thank you so much. And now we proceed in the case studies. In order, we have now Moscow with Ksenia Mezenina. You can start, please.
Yes, good afternoon. Just a second, I will share my screen. All right. My name is Ksenia Mezenina. I'm an architect and I'm an urban planner dealing with heritage projects at Strelka Strategic and Urban Planning Consultancy Company in Moscow, Russia. And I'm pleased to show you the presentation addressing 3 questions related to the current state of Moscow conservation policies and practices. And the questions are how heritage is perceived, what's the history behind it, and see how the matter is transforming now. So what is the understanding of heritage in Moscow? The key point is that the dialogue about heritage lies mostly in a legal framework, where government has the authority to decide what is heritage and what is not, and the power to decline attempts to protect so-called unqualified or unwanted assets. In general, heritage is defined according to the federal law number 73, adopted in 2002, and it gives the definition of heritage, which basically limits it to tangible listed heritage assets of older than 40 years and leaves aside everything else. As a result, there is a lack of wider understanding of what urban heritage is, and local heritage, heritage of minorities, and intangible heritage is left aside. And we hope that this upcoming research project gives us a better understanding and helps widen the views of what heritage in Moscow is. Heritage conservation history in Russia is quite long and intense, with several ups and downs, starting with the first decrees on religious buildings protection and establishment of the Imperial Archaeological Commission in the mid-19th century. And the institutionalization of heritage protection started with the Soviet period and with transferring capital from St. Petersburg to Moscow in 1917, when the first conservation body was established and 1,255 heritage assets were listed. With the start of the Stalinist regime in late 1920s, associated with the idea to build the first capital of socialist world with massive reconstruction plans, there has been a rapid and long-lasting decline in the heritage conservation process, followed by several periods of destruction of historic city districts and demolition of cultural heritage assets for ideological reasons. The main loss of historic urban tissue was the result of the 1935 General Plan realization. At the same time, under the number of listed heritage assets dropped down to only to 100 during that period. After 1950s, as new urban planning ideas appeared and the city gradually grew by 80% of the previous size, the system began to rehabilitate, and the trend of listing bigger amounts of heritage assets appeared simultaneously. So it was the start of positive trend of cultural heritage protection. And since 1976, when the first law on the protection and use of monuments was adopted, we see the systematic resurgence of the sphere and the incline of the number of listed heritage assets. The system experienced the most recent crisis with the collapse of Soviet Union and 2000s building boom, when, as instructed by the mayor, many of the exceptional historic buildings were demolished and others were destroyed and rebuilt. And in the last decade until now, the situation has stabilized. Our recent comparative research on Moscow, Berlin, Paris, London, and Rome, done with the help and support of Francesco Banderin, thank you, Francesco, showed 5 international trends in the sphere of heritage conservation, which are digitization of the heritage protection sphere, the increasing role of civil society and communities in the implementation and protection of heritage, attention to the new heritage types, including the 20th century heritage, increased attention to heritage that is important to individual communities and minorities, and combating climate change. The first one is means active introduction of digital databases and platforms realizing documentation and restoration projects using digital technologies like laser scanning and historic building information modelings, and interactive means of communication like VR and AR technologies. The second trend, mainly about involving communities in the processes of heritage protection, identification of heritage assets, monitoring and maintenance and restoration works, and allowing both parties, governmental and non-governmental, to benefit from cooperation. The third trend shows the interest in 20th century heritage, be it the architecture of modernism or difficult heritage of fascist regime, for example. There is an ongoing search for effective mechanisms of the protection of such heritage. The fourth trend is about rethinking the concept of heritage, making it more inclusive and exploring how aspects such cultural diversity, attitude towards disability, and the changing role of women are translated and valued. And the fifth one is, of course, a global problem, a global challenge. It's about the reducing negative impact on the environment. Even countries, the legislation is being amended to require greater environmental friendliness and of restoration works. As for Moscow, the agenda is not exactly the same. There are three trends that are relevant and two that are absent at the present moment. The first one, which is absent, is the evaluation of local and intangible heritage. And here we are taking into account this, my previous statements of what heritage is. And combating climate change, which is globally accepted problem, but just hasn't been adopted vastly in Russian yet. So speaking about the trends that we have, here we have in the digitization of heritage protection sphere, we have 2 points. Firstly, it's the services, listing processes, and inventory digitization, which is being implemented both on governmental level by the Department of Cultural Heritage in Moscow and as private initiatives. And the digital platforms, including popularization media. Here you have the screenshots of 2 online platforms that shows the itineraries, interesting facts about heritage, and serve as a popularization media for citizens, for people. As for trend number 2, it's presented firstly by activists, heritage protection actions on the right. It's a quite common practice. As for the current situation, it appears the most effective ways for citizens to be heard in terms of heritage protection. Secondly, it's the attracting volunteers to heritage conservation and maintenance work. It's the way that government starts to involve communities and popularize heritage protection. And then third is crowdfunding restoration projects. As for example, you can see here, it's the project of historic plaques restoration made by as a private initiative. And the trend number 3 implies restorations of the 20th century heritage. For example, here on the left, you see the iconic constructivist building, the Dom Narkamfina, which has been recently restored. Secondly, it's the beginning of an expert dialogue on the preservation of modernist building and modernist quarters and districts, I would say, because Moscow has always been a testing ground for USSR mass housing projects, which were implemented here massively. One of the examples is this North Chertanovo district, which has already become a symbol. And so at the end, the relevant question could be, what do we do with this 80% of urban tissue, which is becoming a cultural phenomena, but not necessarily heritage in a common sense? Thank you so much.
So much also for your presentation, Ksenia. And it was very clear, and I think we all have the same concerns also in our big cities like Rio or São Paulo. In Brazil is the same. I would think the same question would be raised. Then we're gonna have the fourth case study, and it's a pleasure to invite Jessie Karuri Sabina to make the presentation with a case study from Johannesburg. After that, then you're gonna have a little good time for questions and answers. Eric and Mike will make the debate, produce the debate. Okay, Jessie, go ahead. The screen is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Vera. And my name is Geshi Karuri Sabina, as introduced. It's a pleasure to be able to share with you today on the Johannesburg case. I am an urban built environment professional and innovation scholar with the South African Cities Network, also doing work with the African Center for Cities. And because I come from that background, I chose to locate my inquiry more along the domains of emerging trends and future heritage and metropolis. So that's what I'll be highlighting in the session. And hopefully it'll add, I think, another dimension to the conversation we're having. And I chose this in part also because the situation in South Africa's growing metropolitan areas is in a context of rapid urbanization, extreme inequality, less than 3 decades coming out of colonization and apartheid, which makes them places of significant tension and rupture, which often raise more questions than answers. So I thought that could be interesting as part of the discussion, and that's why I chose to focus on those aspects of the survey. So I have mentioned that South Africa is marked by this troubled history, a very fractured present, and a very uncertain future. Over the past decade or two, we've had a series of what we call now the must fall movements, and it began with the roads must fall and the taking down of statues and iconic monuments that represented a past that people felt was not the past they wanted to honor into the future. And that's come all the way into the fees must fall, which has to do with current issues that are really affecting the majority youth population. So there's been this upsurge of these decolonial actions and movements that really agitate for a break actually from the past, not a preservation or protection of it. Which is maybe, I think, as Francisco was referring, some heritage institutions may see as sort of the core calling. At the same time, we are confronted with imaginaries, as you can see in the images here, about visions for the future, these images of the smart city, and then also those iconic heritage frameworks that often jar with the realities of these same people whose realities and aspirations are very different. And they feel typically are not reflected or included in those representations of the past or the future. So for me, what it raises is an interesting question around, who we're talking about, whose agency, whose past, whose future, whose benefit or idea of success. In a highly unequal country, it's really always about that to some extent, the many versus the few, who and what we begin to center in the heritage conversation. And for me, this resonated a little bit with the contribution Pedro was making when he was talking about Paris and the periphery and the core and the relationship. In our context, we sometimes find that relationship is almost missing completely. I chose to add this little quote, Soweto is an iconic part of the city of Johannesburg, the largest township. It was the southwestern township that was really sort of this perfect caricature of the apartheid system set out very much by tribal lines. But what this quote in a recent book speaks to is the fact that even in how it's evolving, there are almost, two different views on the nature of this evolution. So whereas we have very vibrant urban nodes that are being regenerated and are seen as being, if you want, the new reflection of a new Soweto and a new promise, And so that would be the first narrative around a developing and successful, attractive Soweto. There is in parallel this other reality, this other narrative of inequality, of capitalism and neglect, and concerns about that and what it means for what others see as the fabric of Soweto. So this kind of fractured reality constantly comes into play, and I think really begins to raise questions, not just about, if you want, the form of heritage, but also, if you want, the subjects of it. And I put this collage to say that what it begins to raise, at least in our context, is the question of what, and I'll use the word the city, and I appreciated the comment earlier that the city is not the metropolis, but excuse me if I use the word city in the case of Johannesburg, just as a space. It can be difficult in a country like South Africa, where there's a strong allure on one side of the economy that presents a face of a South Africa that looks in a way almost like anywhere else, and probably feels very familiar in relation to the metropolitan textbook, right, about what a city is and what it looks like. But if we begin to look at some of these other reflections of the very same city, it raises a whole set of questions. So what is a $10 billion economy? Does it look like the malls that populate a large part of the city, or does it look like Garissa lodges in the Somali Quarter? What is public space? Does public space consider the street takeover by community members in a very locally understood and reciprocal practice that uses temporary structures for church services or weddings or birthday parties and does not see fixed form as a necessary part of that? Are the worshippers who honor and utilize the water buffers for their prayers and rituals, are they ecological conservationists, or are they some kind of intruder? What is a transport node and how is it accommodated in the urban form? What is entertainment? What does a recycling system look like? What is style? What is communication? What is health? Are we stuck in some binaries or some fixed logics of what these things are, where all around us, in fact, there's evidence that they've changed and they're changing, and they are done and manifested in very different ways, some fixed, some not so fixed, across the metropolitan area. So what is recognized, what is analyzed, what is valued, and what is not? We've been part of some studies, and I thought it would be useful to just share one or two of those that begin to already go into some of these inquiries. So, part of what we've been trying to do is to study, for example, through an academic project like this, what is happening actually in the constructed margins of society across a range of themes and emerging factors, everything from issues of gender to the digital, and how those interface with space and are changing space in ways that we don't always recognize, and certainly not in a heritage conversation. So what do those mean? What can we hear in these occluded spaces? What can we see in these occluded spaces as part of the motions of metropolis making and a more inclusive and maybe more textured heritage building of the city of the present and the city of the future? So what might that look like? We are also doing, sorry, I think I've lost one slide here, but also some experimentation around working with communities to really think through other forms of, if you want, collective reflection on what is the city, what is the collective memory, if you want, what is the collective experience of the city, through which common metaphors can be built, grounded in those collective experiences and memories, in a way that could begin revisiting, if you want, what we collectively project, if you want, into the future. So this is experimental work that begins to suggest different starting points for inquiry. So I mentioned it's a city in a way, or a metropolitan area that raises more questions than answers. But we think there's almost a going back to, if you want, the memory, in order to really begin thinking collectively what heritage might mean in a way that isn't about disrupting and tearing down, but becomes about a collective building up. So in summary, I think these were some of the reflections our team was having as we were beginning to think about these questions about heritage and the present, but also as we go into the future, what some of these issues of representation and inclusion might mean for different and new lines maybe of inquiry around heritage. And so I'll stop there, Chair. I hope I haven't exceeded my time.
Thank you so much, Jessie. We will just pass some questions. And we are doing this kind of same work with the children in Rio from the municipal schools, mapping the everyday landscape, everyday heritage, and doing that with our system of elementary schools. We have 1,500 schools in Rio, so we are working with heritage inside schools with the children, so that you're going to see how they are reflecting their concerns with heritage. Thank you and congratulations to all of you. The 4 case studies. Let's read the questions. I have some of the questions are answered by written, and then I have 2 questions that were not yet answered, and then I'll just read them, and then you can wrap. And also I'll ask our panelists, if possible, if they can provide their presentation, if it's possible to give us a presentation, send by email so that you can put on the site, so that people can also access the presentations if you agree. And well, just congratulations to everyone. There are 2 questions I would like to just read so that people can answer. Just me. Well, there's one question from Tiago Marques from the University of São Paulo, Brazil, to Francesco. The HUL recommendation is flexible and adaptive to different cases of cities, considering their own characteristics and cultural habits. How to bring population, civil society together to improve and implement those proposals into metropolises. And it's possible to establish proposals of urban conservation in line with the sustainable development goals in the historical urban landscape. This is one question. And then there's another question from Denis to Ksenia. Do you think the lack of wider understanding of the historical urban landscape as a whole in Moscow is due to the fact that the World Heritage designation is also limited to Kremlin and the Red Square, a more monumental approach? We have these 2 questions. If you can just answer them, and then you pass to Mike. And
I go first. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the question, which is similar to the one that Denise actually raised, and I answered already on the chat. Yes, you see, we should not see the HUL as something like like a charter or something, a set of fixed rules. I mean, HUL has been conceived in a completely different way. It's more an approach, and as such, it's very flexible. And in fact, it can adapt to very small areas like urban ensembles or things like that. It works very well for a classical, traditional urban environment. But we think that it can be extended to other contexts, including the metropolitan context. Now, I think that HUL is an interesting product in that respect. It gives a lot of tools, but we have to remember that in the past decade we had many other injections into the system. So let's consider HUL in the context of tools, not necessarily alone. First of all the tools that existed before. The World Heritage Convention is very rich, and the heritage profession has established in a couple of 100 years a very interesting set of tools that we cannot just forget. But also, let's look at what is on the table today: the SDGs and the new urban agenda. These are really very important reference for HUL. So HUL is not an island. It's part of an archipelago of tools.
And Ksenia, and also there's another one to Gessi. If I just can read the other one, then you both can answer to Gessi. Very interesting to see the initiatives to identify and assess the collective heritage value in Johannesburg. The question: are these all bottom-up initiatives, or do you collaborate also with the local administrators? So we have one to Gessi, another one to Ksenia. You can just both answer, please.
All right, let me try to answer this question. So as I understand, the question is whether the designation only of Kremlin area is directly connected with the more monumental approach that we have in Moscow and in Russia. And personally, I think that it's not directly connected. And for example, as Francesca just said, that the basics of historic urban landscape approach are the global things, the SDGs and the new urban agenda. And unfortunately, I have to say that historic urban approach or those global trends are not implemented, are not taken into account here in Russia yet as a whole. And so we have this monumental approach, but I think it's more connected with our history of our heritage protection and our modernization of the city during the Soviet period and those things. I think it's more about these things. So it's it seems that that people do not do not appreciate the context as much as they should. So it's more about the monumental approach, about the uniqueness, about the buildings themselves, that they don't see the value in the urban context yet. It's just, you know, it seems that it's in the transformation right now, in the transformation process.
Thank you, Ksenia. And also, Gessi, can you answer the question?
Yes, thank you for this question, Denise. So these two different initiatives, the one was an academic initiative, so it depends on whether you think that is top-down or bottom-up. But for the second initiative, it was actually driven by an NGO that very much tried to be bottom-up in the sense of really engaging to the level of individuals and then community-based organizations. But we are now in a second phase of the project where we're trying to use those artifacts to actually begin now engaging with local government officials and other stakeholders to say, well, here's a starting point for another conversation. So we really are trying to build up, if you want, from that initial very local undertaking. So I hope that answers the question. We just thought that starting with the administration would in a way perpetuate the existing form of engagement.
Thank you so much, Gessi. And now I will just ask Michael Turner and Eric Hubrecht to make the comments. So it's up to you guys to start.
Thank you, Vera, and thank you for a wonderful set of presentations. And I always learn something new, which is, even though that we are part of a wider team, but there's always something new coming out of what we're studying together. I think my come away, which I have from the debate, is first of all the speed of change. And in fact, that the metropolis is undergoing such dramatic changes, which challenges our understanding of identities. And I think the changes is very, very different than what happened in the 19th century with the Industrial Revolution. The creation of metropolises is not within industry now, but of the movement of people because of whether it is of other economics and also climate change. Well, I've just come away from a discussion with IUCN, and they said that we in culture are organizing the deck chairs on the top deck of the Titanic, and that we have not really grasped the main issues of climate change and how, in fact, we need to relate to the metropolis. The metropolis is our opportunity to actually manage between culture and nature and urban and rural. It is the very lifestyle, which the lifeblood which we're going to be able to provide for organizing then the city. So the question really is, in the transformation of what is happening, that different people are coming into the city. So the city now is an agglomeration of new cultures which are taking place, new identities, yes, in new wine in old bottles, perhaps, is something which is a little bit dangerous and we need to address. So it's my first part which we have to look at. But this speed of change also then, it looks at disruptive innovation. what happened in the cities in the first part of the 20th century between the horse and cart and the Ford T is now happening between analog and digital science. And we need then to see exactly how can we bring together and how in fact these again can actually understand challenge. The question which was answered by Francesco regarding Hull and its relevance, I think the most important word which I'm beginning to take on board for myself is that of being beyond. It's not just beyond the center, but beyond our the structures which we accept, not just geographical, but also chronological. So the idea, therefore, is that, yes, there is enormous room for taking the approach, and as Francesco said, managing it with the new urban agenda. So I think that we have now this current few years is now the decade of action, and this is where we would like to actually bring the parts together. So I'm looking at the screen and sharing some of the evolving case studies. We were asked by David English, who are the groups, where's happening? It is open-ended, but the main thing which I will pass on afterwards to Eric is the interrelationship between academia and the reality of governance. How can we then create a structure and a better resonance between what is being researched and what is being done? I would like to also think very much about Giamba Bassisto Vico, who actually speaks about that civil life is wholly constructed, and it's not what we are observing, but what we are making.
Yes, thank you very much for all this presentation. It's fascinating to see that in the different contexts we can find some similarities, which is representing some feature of our moment. So for the heritage, all of you in South Africa, in Milan, in Moscow, and in Seoul, you speak about collaborative process, in fact, and the involvement of the communities and the population. So today, the building of the values of the heritage is not only the product of experts. Experts are supporting and providing support, to the communities and to the institution, of course, but also the citizens to define the values. So this changed a lot the approach about the values, because these values can change from place to place, and the definition, like there is some place we have no definition because it's a building process that is changing from time to time. And the presentation on Joburg was exactly what we say now, is that the collaborative process that is done will produce new values for heritage. And so this is, I think this is a key point of the presentation. The other thing is I was very excited by the presentation of Pedro, and in relation with the different presentation of different cities, because in fact, what is the metropolis today? Here we have in fact, if we think about the metropolis, we know that the metropolis of today is the product of the globalization. And so it's different than the relation from city to the territory. The relation of the metropolis is with the rest of the world and with its territory. And the concept of the metropolis, Pedro say very well that it is a system with green, urban and rural areas. It is also, and as Michael Turner said, it is the relation between urban and rural. In fact, it is a system. And if we consider the definition of OECD, or the European definition and the French one, it is the functional urban areas that this local system is connecting with the global system. This is the soul of the metropolis. And so if we take this into account and we consider that the metropolis today is the main artifact of our century, there is a multiplication of metropolitan areas everywhere in the world with different shapes, with different definition. In fact, there is no common definition of the metropolis, except it is a system connected with the rest of the world. If we consider that, we can say that the metropolis will be the main heritage, our heritage for the future generation. So this is the key point. How to define the metropolis? It's not in a delimitation, because the delimitation of the metropolis is not the urban agglomeration. It's a system that is moving from time to time. We can consider that the COVID crisis was very exciting for this, because with the moving of the population, the connection with the by internet for the workers, a large part of the workers change the scale of the metropolis. Before, we are defining the metropolis, the functional urban areas, by the mobility system and the connection from day to day with the agglomeration, with the economic centers inside the agglomeration. But if you take into account this connection today, with a large part, sometimes it's 40% are in teleworking, and some of them, a large part of them, not a majority, is out of this close the agglomeration and the close suburbs in the rural area around the city. What is the scale of the metropolis? So this is not clear. And in fact, the connection is a day-to-day. When you have people going at 500 kilometers for 2 days per week to work and continue to work for the same company, which is the headquarters in the center part of Paris, they are part of the metropolis or not? Probably yes. And so we have to, so the definition of the metropolis will change. And so I appreciate a lot what the Antonella say, which is what is the most important. It's not, probably it's not the tangible things, but it is what is durable. And what is durable, and it is what is able to produce new relationships. And it could be public space, like the Corso Garibaldi in Milan, or the hospital that has been changed in university and other elements. It could be the river and that connect with the rest of the territory and the region. This is important, but probably what is more important for us is how the metropolis is upgrading the value of itself by changing the uses inside the metropolis. And it is what explained Antonella was the same, but we can say something similar to Paris when we change a motorway, which is a unique function for cars and mobility, to public space along the Seine River in the center part of Paris. So motorways become a public space for pedestrians. And so we make 2 times this in Paris, and Seoul did the same thing with the river close to the city center, and New York and Montreal and Portland and other cities. And this changed the value of the space, and it is very important because it changed the value of one part of the main structure of the metropolis, which is structured by the motorways, the railways, and other large gray and white infrastructure. So, and green infrastructure, of course, when we change the river and the surrounding of the river from the production to the leisure and green spaces. And so we have to define these elements, and probably the most important is to see how the metropolis gain some new values related to the collaborative process to define the values, but also upgrade its condition. And probably the COVID crisis will push our government and the climate change to make city better, with more biodiversity, more green spaces, more quality of life. We hope so, but there is a lot of pressure on that today. And to give more value that is recognized by the communities and cities. So it was, for me, a very fascinating moment that we have today with this discussion, because there is a lot of convergence between the different elements that you provide. And this is a good step for the beginning of our research program. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Eric. And now we just would like to invite Rafael Forero from UN Habitat to talk to us, to start the speech. And it's a pleasure to have you here, Rafael, and I hope you can just help us with a good ending and wrap up with this, the way forward, from here to where. Thank you, Rafael.
Thank you, Vera. Thank you, Mai, Francesco, Eric, and of course, all of you. Happy to be here. And let me say that I was listening to you very careful, and I am very interested in the discussion, because I think that the different discussions and the cases presented today reaffirm to us one idea, one important idea. And which is the idea that there is not a unique and there is not only one way to define what a metropolis is and to understand what our metropolises work. So, of course, this also applies to all kind of cities, and this is a very recent work that we are doing within UN Habitat. And also, I like very the insight about the treasures, because I think that classic treasures and definitions, perhaps, of course, useful in some point or at some point in the last century, maybe today could look very outdated when speaking about cities and metropolises and the different contextual realities. And also if we take into account the political, the cultural, and the environmental dimensions of our cities and metropolises today. This is also an idea which is very related with a recent work and that we are doing from Young Habitat, and also I think with the theme and with the subject of this heritage session, no, which is or in the sense that these sessions looks for a new approaches to understand metropolises and cities. We are participating in this initiative and framing our collaboration with this initiative within a more general programmatic work that we are doing within UN Habitat, which is called Metro Hub, and which is about supporting metropolitan and regional development worldwide. And we think that involving in territorial and in metropolitan management, involving the political, the cultural, the environmental and territorial dimensions are key and are fundamental for this decade of action and to achieve the sustainable development goals from our cities and our metropolis, no? As Mike mentioned it before. So we are very happy to contribute with this initiative. We hope to be part on the research and on the development of the case studies, and to incorporate some of the findings of these case studies to our global state of metropolis report, which is a flagship publication that we are preparing from UN Habitat, and we hope to release maybe late this year or early next one, and we hope to present all these findings also in the WOOF 11, which is the World Urban Forum that will be held in Poland, in Katowice, next June, June 2022. So I would like to seize this opportunity also to invite you all to apply to the different events and networking training events that we are organizing for the WOOF, for the World Urban Forum, and maybe to think about how this heritage network can play an important role in this path to the WOOF and in the WOOF itself. As you may know, all these global gatherings and all these global events organized by United Nations have, of course, an awareness purpose, but also a political one, which is finishing the events with a political declaration, which serve for boosting or for improving the implementation of the global agendas. And I think that the subject of heritage and the relationship between heritage and metropolises could be a great input for that political declaration next year. So thank you so much again for involve us in this initiative. We are very happy to take part of this. and happy to contribute with all this research. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Rafael. And I was there in World Urban Forum in Malaysia and also Abu Dhabi last year. And I think we have a very good way to promote a network session for that Metropolitan hub. I think it's a good idea to think about that and prepare that session for WF. Well, I would just thank you so much for your being here with us. And we are on time. We have a next session coming up pretty soon in half an hour. So Monica I'll ask her to put here in the chat the link. And first of all, I thank you very much for Pedro, Mike, Eric, Rafael for promoting the debate and putting on some very good, nice ideas in our minds to think about and continue from here. And also I'd like to thank so much Choi, Antonella, Gessi, and Ksenia for the case studies, for very rich contributions. It's very important to have the case studies strategy to think what can we think as a parallel about between our metropolitan regions. As I am studying in Rio, we have fluid limits. Limits are not fixed; they are fluid in the metropolitan scale. And I think it's nice to think about this new literature, new bibliography, new strategy, new tactics to research and understand better our metropolitan context and culture. And also, I would like to thank a lot Tatiana for being our Rivera from Colombia, also from our PhD student from Federal University for preparing the report on the session, and Landy for the technical support. Monica and Rubens and De Andrade are my partners from the Federal University. Thank you so much for being here. And Daniele Pini and Jonathan that are our co-conveners for the Globener, for our new approach to Globener. And thank you all for the attendees that are here, the questions that you propose, and also the attendees that are all in the YouTube channel. Thank you so much for being with us. And I hope you can be with us in the next sessions of our Globener and also during the 2021 year of the debate that we will take every month with a new theme. So thank you, Mike, and also Eric and Pedro for starting over and then for joining us here in this very interesting session. Mike and Eric, you want to say something, Mike? You started that, you have to finish also.
No, I think that's fine. I always say that we found a few minutes early. I say nobody ever complains when the lecture finishes a few minutes early. So that's really good. We've got space and time to think and reflect, and that's what we need in the Metro Hub. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, we are concerned about time, that now you have time to think about and brief a little bit and also take that thoughts to our studies and students and also our research. Thank you so much for being with us, and I hope